I was 32 when Arnold died. My first son, 8 weeks old. SIDS, they called it, sudden infant death syndrome. The doctor said it like it explained everything. It explained nothing. The phone call came at 2:23 a.m. on a Thursday. I remember the exact time because I kept staring at the clock, thinking this couldn't be real. Sarah was hysterical. The words didn't make sense. Arnold was fine that evening. He was perfect. He was alive. I drove to the hospital. The emergency room looked normal. People sitting around like nothing had changed, like the world hadn't just ended. I wanted to scream at them. Your world is still intact. Mine just shattered. The hospital room was too bright, too sterile, too quiet. Arnold was lying there, so small, so still. I touched his cheek. It was cold. That's when I knew it was real. That's when something inside me broke that I didn't know could break. Sarah couldn't stop shaking. I couldn't start. I felt hollow, emptied out, like someone had reached inside me and pulled out everything that gave my life meaning. The nurses kept talking, procedures to follow, paperwork to complete. I nodded at everything. I signed documents. I answered questions, but I wasn't really there. We had to leave him. That was the hardest part. Walking out of that hospital without our son, driving home to a house that still had his things everywhere, his bassinet, his tiny clothes, his stuffed animals, everything exactly as we'd left it when we rushed out that night. I stood in his nursery for hours, just standing there looking at the nightlight on the wall, the soft glow he used to find comforting. He used to sleep so peacefully in that gentle light. Now it glowed for no one. People started calling my parents friends. They meant well. They said things like, "I'm so sorry for your loss." And "He's with the angels now." I stopped answering the phone. There was nothing anyone could say that would help. Nothing anyone could do. The funeral was 4 days later. I don't remember much about it. Too many people, too many flowers, too many words that didn't bring him back. I kept thinking this was all wrong. Babies aren't supposed to die. Parents aren't supposed to bury their children. That night, I sat in my car in the garage. I couldn't go inside. I couldn't face that empty house. I couldn't face Sarah's pain on top of my own. I couldn't face the silence where Arnold's little sounds used to be. I thought about calling in sick the next day. But sick from what? Grief isn't a fever. It's not something you recover from in a few days. It's something that changes you forever. Something that makes you question everything you thought you knew about life. The worst part wasn't the funeral. It wasn't the hospital. It wasn't even losing Arnold. The worst part was realizing that I had to keep living, that the sun would keep rising, that other people would keep having babies, that life would go on without my son. I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to exist in a world where Arnold didn't. The days after the funeral were worse than the funeral itself. At least during the service, there were things to do, people to talk to, rituals to follow. After everyone left, there was just silence. The kind of silence that feels like it's crushing you, making it hard to breathe. Sarah and I barely spoke. We moved around each other like wounded animals. Each lost in our own agony. She'd start crying without warning. I'd find her in Arnold's room, holding his onesie, sobbing. I didn't know how to comfort her. I didn't know how to comfort myself. I went back to work after a week. Everyone was careful around me. Soft voices, sympathetic glances. They meant well, but their pity felt like stones on my chest. I'd sit in meetings, nodding, pretending to listen, but all I could think about was Arnold. The worst moments were the unexpected ones. I'd be driving and see a baby carrier in another car. I'd be at the store and hear a baby gurgling. I'd be walking past a park and see parents holding their infants each time. It was like getting kicked in the ribs. People kept asking how I was doing. "How are you coping?" They'd say. What was I supposed to say? That I felt like I was suffocating. That I woke up every morning hoping it was all a dream. That I couldn't understand why other people's babies got to live when mine didn't. I started avoiding places where there might be babies. Restaurants, malls, the grocery store on weekends. It was easier to stay home, but home wasn't safe either. Arnold's room was still there. His things were still there. The silence was still there. Sarah wanted to talk about it, about him, about what happened, about how we were going to survive this. I couldn't. Every time she brought it up, I felt like I was choking. I'd leave the room, go for a walk, find somewhere to be alone with the pain. The nights were the worst. I'd lie awake listening to the silence. Arnold used to make soft sounds when he slept. Gentle breathing, tiny sighs. Now there was nothing, just the emptiness where those sounds used to be. I started staying up later, working later. Anything to avoid going to bed because bed meant lying in the dark with my thoughts. It meant facing the reality that Arnold was gone and never coming back. One night, I found myself standing in his nursery at 1:30 a.m. I'd been doing this every night without realizing it, going to his room, standing by his crib, waiting for something that would never happen, waiting for him to wake up, waiting for this to be over. The nightlight was still there, casting the same soft glow. Arnold used to stare at it with such fascination, like he was trying to memorize every pattern of light. Now it just glowed in the darkness. Empty. I sat down in the chair where I used to feed him his bottle. The chair where I'd hold him when he was fussy. Where I'd whisper to him about everything and nothing. Where I'd tell him about the world he'd never get to explore. That's when I finally cried. Not the tears that come from sadness, but the tears that come from something deeper. From a place inside you that you didn't know existed until it shatters. I cried for Arnold. I cried for the future we'd never have. I cried for the man I used to be before I knew this kind of pain existed. The crying didn't make me feel better. It just made me feel empty, like I'd drained out of everything, like there was nothing left inside me worth saving. Everyone wanted to know why. Why did this happen? What went wrong? Could we have done something different? The doctors had no answers. SIDS is just something that happens. No explanation, no prevention, no way to make sense of it. I started researching everything I could find about SIDS. Medical journals, research papers, statistics. I thought if I could understand it, maybe I could accept it, maybe I could find some reason, some logic, some explanation that would make this bearable. There was nothing, no clear cause, no pattern, no way to predict it or prevent it. Healthy babies just stop breathing for no reason anyone could understand. The randomness of it was almost worse than the loss itself. I read about other parents who'd lost children to SIDS. Their stories were all the same. Normal day, normal baby, then nothing. They all asked the same questions I was asking. They all searched for the same answers that didn't exist. Some of them blamed themselves. They wondered if they'd put the baby down wrong, if they'd missed some sign, if they'd done something that caused it. The guilt was eating them alive. I understood that. I felt it, too. Had I held Arnold wrong? Had I missed something? Was I too focused on work to notice signs? The questions went around and around in my head, never finding answers, never finding peace. Sarah was asking the same questions. She'd read the same articles. She'd talked to the same doctors. She'd wake up in the middle of the night with new theories, new possibilities, new ways to torture herself with what-ifs. We were both drowning in questions that had no answers, both searching for explanations that didn't exist, both trying to make sense of something that was fundamentally senseless. I started avoiding other parents. Their casual complaints about sleepless nights and crying babies felt like daggers. They didn't know how lucky they were. They didn't know that their problems were blessings. At least their babies were alive to keep them awake. The worst was when people tried to help by saying things like, "Everything happens for a reason," or, "God has a plan." These weren't reasons. They were just ways of avoiding the horrible truth that sometimes terrible things happen for no reason at all. I stopped believing in reasons. I stopped believing in plans. I stopped believing in the idea that the universe made sense. Arnold's death wasn't part of some bigger plan. It wasn't a lesson. It wasn't a test. It was just random, senseless tragedy. The lack of answers made everything worse. If there had been a reason, maybe I could have accepted it. If there had been someone to blame, maybe I could have focused my anger. If there had been something I could have done differently, maybe I could have learned from it. But there was nothing, no reason, no blame, no lesson, just the fact that my son was dead, and I had to find a way to live with that. I started to understand why some parents never recover from losing a child. How can you recover from something that makes no sense? How can you heal from a wound that has no explanation? How can you move forward when the world has shown you that nothing you do matters? The questions without answers became a kind of torture. Every day brought new ones. Every night brought the same old ones, round and round, never finding peace, never finding closure, never finding any way to make this okay. I realized that maybe the point wasn't to find answers. Maybe the point was to learn to live without them, to accept that some things in life are simply unacceptable, to find a way to exist in a world that doesn't make sense. But I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to live without needing reasons. I didn't know how to accept the unacceptable. Losing Arnold didn't bring Sarah and me together. It drove us apart. We were both drowning, but we couldn't save each other. We could barely save ourselves. She needed to talk about it. I needed to avoid talking about it. She wanted to remember. I wanted to forget. She cried openly. I buried everything deep inside. We were dealing with the same loss in completely different ways, and neither of us knew how to bridge that gap. The silence between us grew heavier every day. We'd sit at breakfast, not talking, both thinking about the empty infant seat on the counter. We'd watch TV, not really watching, both hearing the absence of baby sounds. We'd go to bed, lying side by side, both feeling utterly alone. I threw myself into work, 14-hour days, 16-hour days, anything to avoid being home, anything to avoid facing the pain, anything to avoid seeing the hurt in Sarah's eyes when I couldn't give her what she needed. She accused me of running away. She was right. I was running as fast as I could from the reality of Arnold's death, from the pain, from the memories, from the future we'd never have, from the father I'd never get to be. Work became my escape, problems I could solve, challenges I could meet, progress I could measure. It was the only place where I felt like I had any control, the only place where I felt like myself. But coming home was torture. Sarah would be there, still grieving, still needing comfort I couldn't give, still wanting to talk about Arnold when all I wanted was to forget, still crying when I had no tears left. I started staying later at the office, taking business trips I didn't need to take, finding reasons to be anywhere but home. I told myself I was working through the grief. Really, I was just avoiding it. The distance between us grew wider every day. She'd reach for my hand and I'd pull away. She'd try to talk about Arnold and I'd change the subject. She'd cry and I'd leave the room. I was failing as a husband just when she needed me most. Our friends didn't know how to help. They'd invite us to dinner and we'd sit there like strangers. They'd try to include us in conversations about their children and we'd both go silent. They'd ask how we were doing and we'd give them polite lies. Some people thought we should try to have another baby right away. Others thought we should wait. Everyone had opinions about how we should grieve, how we should heal, how we should move forward. No one understood that we were barely surviving each day. The worst part was that we were both good people who loved each other, but grief had made us strangers. We couldn't comfort each other because we were both broken. We couldn't help each other because we were both drowning. We couldn't save our marriage because we couldn't save ourselves. I knew I was being selfish. I knew Sarah needed me to be present, to be available, to be the partner she deserved. But I felt like I had nothing left to give. Like Arnold's death had emptied me of everything that made me human. The guilt about failing her was almost worse than the grief about losing Arnold. At least Arnold's death wasn't my fault, but destroying my marriage with the woman I loved, the woman who had given me my son, the woman who was suffering as much as I was, that was on me. I started to wonder if we'd ever be able to look at each other without seeing Arnold's absence, if we'd ever be able to be happy again without feeling guilty about it, if we'd ever be able to move forward together, or if we were both just going to drag each other down. The marriage that had created Arnold couldn't survive his death. The love that had brought us together couldn't withstand the pain of losing him. We were both casualties of the same tragedy, and we couldn't save each other. The numbness didn't last forever. After months of feeling nothing, the anger came. Not the quick, hot anger of frustration, but the deep cold anger of injustice. The kind of anger that sits in your chest like a rock, making it hard to breathe. I was angry at God, even though I wasn't sure I believed in God. I was angry at the universe for being random and cruel. I was angry at other parents who got to keep their babies. I was angry at myself for not being able to protect Arnold. I was angry at Sarah for needing more than I could give. Most of all, I was angry at the unfairness of it all. Why Arnold? Why us? Why did some babies live and others die? Why did some families get to be happy while others were destroyed? There was no logic to it, no justice, no reason. The anger made me impossible to be around. I'd snap at people over nothing. I'd lose my temper in meetings. I'd get furious at drivers who cut me off, at cashiers who moved too slowly, at anyone who had the audacity to be happy when my world had fallen apart. I started picking fights with Sarah, not about Arnold directly, but about everything else, about laundry that needed to be done, about bills that needed to be paid, about her mother calling too much, about nothing and everything. I think I wanted her to be as angry as I was. I wanted her to fight back, but she was too tired to fight, too sad to match my anger. She'd just look at me with those hollow eyes and ask me to stop, to please just stop, and I would for a while until the anger built up again, and I'd explode over something else. I was angry at parents who complained about their children, angry at people who said they were exhausted from staying up with a fussy baby, angry at anyone who took for granted what I'd lost. Didn't they know how lucky they were? Didn't they understand that their problems were privileges? I was angry at the doctor who couldn't save Arnold, at the hospital that couldn't explain what happened, at the medical system that had no answers, at the research that hadn't prevented this, at the world that had let my son die. The anger was eating me alive, but I couldn't let it go. It felt like the only thing keeping me connected to Arnold. If I stopped being angry about his death, what would that say about how much he meant to me? If I moved on, would that mean I was forgetting him? I started working even longer hours, not because I needed to, but because the anger made me restless. I couldn't sit still. I couldn't relax. I couldn't find peace anywhere. Work was the only place where I could channel the anger into something productive. But even at work, the anger leaked out. I'd get frustrated with colleagues who made mistakes, impatient with meetings that moved too slowly, intolerant of problems that seemed trivial compared to what I was dealing with. I wasn't the leader I used to be. I wasn't the person I used to be. The anger isolated me from everyone. Friends stopped calling because I was too difficult to be around. Family kept their distance because I'd lash out without warning. Even Sarah, who understood my pain better than anyone, started avoiding me. I knew the anger was destroying what was left of my life. I knew it was pushing away the people I needed most. I knew it was making me into someone I didn't recognize, but I couldn't stop it. The anger felt like all I had left. Late at night, when the anger was at its worst, I'd find myself in Arnold's room again, looking at his things, holding his blanket, feeling the rage build up in my chest until I thought I might explode. Sometimes I'd punch the wall, sometimes I'd throw things, sometimes I'd just scream until my throat was raw. The anger wasn't helping me heal. It wasn't bringing Arnold back. It wasn't making anything better. It was just destroying everything good that was left in my life. But I didn't know how to let it go. I didn't know how to live without it. I was angry at being angry. Angry at being stuck in this cycle. Angry at not being able to move forward. Angry at not being able to go back. Angry at being trapped in a present that felt impossible to endure. The anger was my prison and I was both the prisoner and the guard. The anger couldn't last forever. It burned too hot, consumed too much energy. After months of rage, I was exhausted, empty, ready to collapse. That's when something started to shift, not toward healing exactly, but towards something quieter, something more sustainable. I started having dreams about Arnold, not the nightmares I'd been having, but gentle dreams. He was older in these dreams, crawling, babbling, smiling, dreams where he was alive and happy and safe. I'd wake up feeling peaceful for the first few seconds before reality crashed back down. But those few seconds of peace showed me something important. It was possible to think about Arnold without pain. Not often, not easily, but it was possible. The memories didn't have to be torture. They could be something else, something gentler. I started allowing myself to remember the good moments. The first time he opened his eyes and looked at me. The way he'd grip my finger with his tiny hand. The soft sounds he made when he was content. The weight of him sleeping on my chest. These memories hurt, but they also felt precious. Sarah and I started talking about him sometimes. Not about his death, but about his life. About the 8 weeks we had with him. About the way he'd react to our voices. About his expressions and gestures. About the little person he was becoming before he was taken away. These conversations were painful, but they were also healing. They reminded us that Arnold had been real, that he had mattered, that those 8 weeks weren't nothing. They were everything. They were all we had, and they were worth remembering. I realized I'd been so focused on his death that I'd forgotten to honor his life, so focused on the pain of losing him that I'd forgotten the joy of having him, so focused on the emptiness he left behind that I'd forgotten the fullness he'd brought to those 8 weeks. The acceptance didn't come all at once. It came in waves, good days and bad days, moments of peace followed by moments of crushing sadness, progress followed by setbacks. But gradually the bad days became less frequent, the sadness became less overwhelming, the peace became more sustainable. I started to understand that healing didn't mean forgetting, it didn't mean moving on, it meant learning to carry the loss in a way that didn't destroy everything else. It meant finding a way to live with the pain instead of being consumed by it. I began to see that Arnold's death, as senseless as it was, had taught me things I wouldn't have learned otherwise, about fragility, about what really mattered, about the preciousness of time, about the depth of love, about the strength that comes from surviving something you thought would destroy you. I wasn't grateful for his death. I would trade everything I'd learned to have him back, but I was grateful for the 8 weeks I had with him. I was grateful for the father he'd made me, even if only briefly. I was grateful for the love I'd felt, even though it came with such devastating loss. The acceptance wasn't about being okay with what happened, it was about being okay with not being okay, about accepting that some losses never fully heal, about understanding that you can build a meaningful life even while carrying grief. I started to realize that the question wasn't how to get over Arnold's death, the question was how to live with it, how to honor his memory while still moving forward, how to be the father he'd never get to see, even though he wasn't there to see it. The acceptance brought a different kind of peace, not the peace of resolution, but the peace of surrender, not the peace of understanding, but the peace of accepting that some things don't need to be understood, just endured, just survived, just lived with. I was still broken, I would always be broken, but I was learning to live with the brokenness instead of being destroyed by it. The person who emerged from those dark months wasn't the same man who'd lost Arnold. He was quieter, more careful with his words, more aware of how fragile everything really was, more grateful for small moments that he used to take for granted. I learned to live with the sadness, not to overcome it or defeat it, but to carry it alongside everything else, the way you carry a permanent injury that never fully heals, but doesn't have to prevent you from walking. The sadness became part of me, but it didn't have to be all of me. My relationship with Sarah couldn't survive the loss, but we found a way to honor what we'd shared. We'd created Arnold together, we'd loved him together, we'd lost him together. That bond would always exist, even if our marriage couldn't. I started to understand that some experiences change you so fundamentally that you can never go back to who you were before. Arnold's death was one of those experiences. The man who existed before his birth was gone. The man who existed during those 8 weeks was gone. The man who emerged from his death was someone new. This new version of myself was more aware of suffering. I could see it in other people's eyes. I could recognize the signs of hidden grief. I could understand the weight that some people carry invisibly. I joined a club I'd never wanted to join, but it gave me a different kind of empathy. I started to appreciate ordinary moments in a way I never had before. A conversation with a friend, a meal that tasted good, a sunset that was particularly beautiful. These things mattered more now because I understood how quickly they could be taken away. The work that had once consumed me became less urgent, still important, but not everything. I realized that being successful couldn't protect me from loss, that achieving goals couldn't guarantee happiness, that all the accomplishments in the world couldn't bring back what mattered most. I learned to be comfortable with sadness, to let it exist without trying to fix it or escape from it, to understand that healing doesn't mean returning to who you were before. Sometimes it means becoming someone entirely new, someone who can carry loss without being destroyed by it. I started to see Arnold's brief life as a gift, even though it came with such a devastating price. 8 weeks of perfect love, 8 weeks of being exactly the father I wanted to be, 8 weeks of experiencing a connection deeper than anything I'd ever felt. Those 8 weeks were worth a lifetime of grief. The dreams about Arnold continued, but they changed. Instead of dreams where he was older, I started dreaming about the time we actually had, holding him, feeding him, watching him sleep. These dreams didn't hurt anymore. They felt like visits, like moments of grace. I realized that Arnold would always be with me in a way that transcended physical presence. Every time I thought about what kind of man I wanted to be, I thought about the man he would have wanted as a father. Every time I faced a difficult decision, I thought about what I'd want him to see me choose. The grief never fully went away, but it transformed from something that threatened to destroy me into something that deepened me. From something that made me angry into something that made me more compassionate. From something that isolated me into something that connected me to other people who'd suffered similar losses. I learned that you can survive anything if you're willing to be changed by it. That strength isn't about being unbreakable, it's about learning to rebuild yourself from the pieces. That healing isn't about forgetting, it's about integrating loss into a life that can still hold meaning. Arnold lived for 8 weeks. He died at 8 weeks, but his impact on me will last forever. He made me a father. He taught me about love. He showed me what really mattered. He changed me in ways that will influence every day I have left. The man who lost Arnold died with him. The man who survived learned to live with loss. The man who emerged from that darkness was someone I'm proud Arnold could have called father, even if only for 8 weeks. He may not have lived long, but he lived fully. He was loved completely. He mattered absolutely, and in the end, maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything.